Greetings and welcome back to the program. I'm JP Maroney. This is Justice Impact Show, and I have a special guest, actually a friend and a colleague here on the show with us today. It's Stephen Keller. He is the author of a brand new book that just came out in the last 2 or 3 weeks called Pay to Play. We're going to be talking about that today. We're also going to talk a little bit about his past, an industry that he actually helped create, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that he's doing in the justice space through Justice Restoration Foundation these days, and talk about what the future holds. So, on this program, we talk to a lot of different kind of people, Steve. Includes people that are professionals in the industry of justice. It could be attorneys, advocates, directors of nonprofits, policymakers, politicians, all sorts of people. And then we also interview and talk to people who have been impacted and affected by the justice process. And it can include people who are or have been defendants in cases. Some have been convicted, some have pled guilty, some have been acquitted, some have had cases go to trial, been convicted, been incarcerated, and had those overturned even later. And so we talked to a wide variety of people. You yourself went through an experience, and in fact, Pay to Play was the result of you writing a book, longhand, in prison, to give a little bit of a spoiler. And we want to talk about that in this program. Steve Keller, welcome to Justice Impact.
Well, thanks for having me here, JP, and thanks for sharing your space with me.
Absolutely. So you're a Kentucky boy. I want to
Yes.
kind of start there. You're from Lexington, Kentucky. Growing up and thinking about the future, what did young Stephen Keller think success was going to look like in the future?
Well, starting out, I was actually from Eastern Kentucky, a very small county named West Liberty, and I grew up without any fast food chains there. There was only one semblance of a fast food restaurant. It was called the Freezer Fresh, and that was iconic. To anybody that lives there, still is today, still there. And it was a place where the teenagers would circle about 1,000 times, drive down Main Street and circle back around and to see and be seen. And it was kind of the only activity in that small town back then. But growing up, I was always wired to be a entrepreneur, and I guess I inherited that from my dad, and probably watching my dad. He was an entrepreneur himself. He was in the recycled car parts industry. He started it himself, and I guess that just gravitated over to me. I'm not really sure, but as a young kid growing up, I was always looking for enterprise, looking for things to do. And I remember my first enterprise was in the fourth grade. And I had a neighbor of mine that sold a Willy Wonka chocolate factory to me. And it was a kid. And, you would melt chocolates and make the molds. I enticed my mom to be my financial backer on it. And she also ended up being my partner because I had her to help make the molds. And so this business grew, and I started selling all this candy to school. And there was one morning I was met with a PA system that came throughout the whole entire school, and it summons me to come to the principal's office. And I went to the principal's office, and I was summoned there because I was selling so much candy that I was eating into the allocation that the government pays the school to match the school fund, the school lunches. And the scheme back then was the government would offset the cost of the school lunches, but the students had to buy the lunch. So they were choosing to buy the candy instead of the lunch, and it was a problem. So the principal told me that I was impeding on their government being able to match the lunches because I was taking all the money from these people, and I was immediately ordered to shut down. And that was the end of my candy business, and that was the first time the government shut me down. Was in the fourth grade.
So you received your first cease and desist in the fourth grade.
I did, yeah. So, but yeah, growing up there, I mean, there wasn't a lot of opportunities. I wasn't sure that I was thinking about what was next. I was very driven in whatever I did. I had a guy that moved there from Ohio that was a former track star, and he introduced me to pole vaulting, which nobody ever heard of. We didn't even have a track, and so this guy agreed to coach me after his work. He was in the construction business. So at the end of the day, he would meet me, and we made a makeshift pole vaulting pit behind my house in this large field, and had the runway out of sawdust. We built a wooden box to plant the pole. We had two by twos with nails in them. that secured a long rope across them. That's what I jumped over. It was secured by two Chuck Taylor tennis shoes, and that was the weight. And then behind that was a pile of sawdust that I landed in, and I could only go so high before it would hurt. So when I would go to meets, I would continue jumping after the meet. And one 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 evening, I was met with this guy, and he came over and he said, "Keller, you already won the meet. Why are you still jumping?" And I said, "It's the only place I can practice. It doesn't hurt to land." So that was it. And the following year, I was the first person from that small county to ever win the state title in anything. And I won the state that year in the pole vaulting.
Very good.
So
So
I was always very, very aggressive, very driven to be first, very competitive, and that attitude continued on after I got out with the company. That was just ingrained in me, I guess.
so where did you go to college?
So after high school, I accepted a scholarship for football. I was actually a punter, and I did that at Georgetown College in Kentucky, right outside Lexington, Kentucky, and that is the house of the Toyota plant now in Kentucky. There wasn't much going on when I was there. I think we had one fast food chain then, but certainly changed over the course of time since I've been there. But Georgetown is a very small school. They had about 5,000 students, I think, at the time, and very very good school for entrepreneurs. I think they house more CEOs from that small school than any school in Kentucky.
How did you how do you think you gravitated towards entrepreneurial life? Was there any influence or others in your childhood or growing up that or even in college that inspired you, or did you read some books? What was it that turned on the spark, you think?
Uh, I think my dad had a big influence on me, a big impact growing up because I was trying to think back and there really wasn't anybody else around me that was in that space. And then I continued to gravitate towards that. I was always fascinated with the stock market, and it was my dad really that broke me into that. I remember he gave me a few $100 and he said, "I'm going to teach you about the stock market." I said, "Okay, I'm ready for my lesson." And he said, "Here's a couple $100, go find a stock." So that was my lesson. So, and the first stock I bought was Apple Computer when it first came out, and nobody really knew what that was. So I continued to buy and sell that stock as it went up and down, and it just became second nature to me. And so I continued this stock trading even when I was going to college, and that couple $100 ended up being several $1,000s, over the course of a few years. And I just had a knack for business and acclimate for trading stocks and that arena, and that's what I majored in college, and I aspired to go into after I got out, never dreaming that I would step out into the arena that I created.
So you were 27 when you started Kilco, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So I was a stockbroker early on with Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, and I worked for them for a couple years. And during that time, I had met a another guy that was in my training class, and he introduced me to the idea of people selling policies, insurance policies for cash. That these are people that had life insurance policies, and primarily how this started out was in the AIDS epidemic era. And people that had contracted AIDS were selling their life insurance policies as a form of health care. They could buy not approved drugs, with this money, or they were just affording them living costs because they were sick, they wasn't working. So they had rent and, food and just cost of living. And they were using these policies to do that. So that's how this whole industry got started.
So, connect the dots for me. I think it was Elon Musk that said most great businesses are founded on failed assumptions. When you first got into this, and where did you think it was going to go? What did you think it was going to turn into? What did you hope it would turn into? What were your expectations? How did you find your way through it? You were, in virgin territory. So, what how did that go in those early days?
Well, I mean, Elon's partially right, and I mean, he's the greatest entrepreneur in the world as far as I'm concerned, ever has been. And but what happened here was I had this conversation with this cohort and Dean Witter, And he introduced me to this idea, and he said, "Have you heard of people selling their policies for cash? There's people out here they're terminally ill that are selling monies for cash." He said, "What do you think about this?" And my first blush was because on the offset, it looked morbid to me, and I conveyed that. I said, I think it's kind of morbid sounding, but I didn't look at the benefit this allowed people to have, and so the longer I sat with this, the more I could see that this was a great service and people desperately needed it. And so on the failed attempt, it really wasn't my failure, but it was somebody else's failure that brought me to the fruition of putting this thing together. And I had another contact that came to me with a private company, great concept. He had a water filtration company that this machine would go in a grocery store. You would push a button and it would filter water and put it into a paper carton. Pull open the door and take your paper carton, and you would go to the counter and pay for it. So this was big because paper has no shelf life with water. It won't, the seals won't stay sealed very long with water. It just dissolves it. So, and all we have is all this plastic. So I thought this is a great way to get rid of the plastic. And the guy had substantial board members. He had International Paper, Hank Warren, who was the youngest vice president in history of Van Camp Stokely's that brought Gatorade to market. So he had all these substantial people on his board, but he had a problem. He said he had oversold his stock and he wasn't through with the R&D on the product. So they ran out of money and he really had nothing to sell to get money. So he came to me and said, "Steve, can you design a way or figure out a way that we can survive here?" So I said, "Give me a day or two and I'll call you back." So it resonated with me, the conversation I had with my coworker about the policies. And I thought, you know what? This is a good service and this is a way that I can bridge both. If I take those policies and create assets for this other company, they could create bonds backed by the policies to guarantee the investors, and people could invest in the bonds, and the money flow could go to the people that needed the monies that sell their policies. So it killed two birds in one stone. So I took this idea with the CEO. He introduced me to their board over the phone, and it was like, here's the board. Steve, would you tell them your idea? That quick. I didn't have time to think about it. So uh, I told him this idea about what I had and I introduced him to the policies. And there wasn't a sound when I got done talking about, the way this could work. And I looked at the receiver of the phone. That's back when we had the old phone in the cradles, before the flip phones or cell phones or anything. We had an actual phone with a cord on it. And so I looked at the receiver and I thought, this is going to be the death of me. This is the stupidest idea I've ever had in my life. And I put the phone back into the cradle. And as soon as I did that, the phone started ringing, and I'd pick up the phone and I'd answer the phone, and it would be one of these board members saying, "That is the most brilliant idea ever." Said, "We want to invest in policies in ourselves. Can we do that?" And I said, "Sure, as long as we take care of this company first, we can do that." And just one right after another, just kept calling. So I went back to my coworker and I said, "Look, the idea you brought me a couple weeks ago, I think it's got legs." I told him what happened. And I said, "I want to start a company. I want to start doing this." And he said, "What are we going to call it?" His last name was Conway and mine's Keller. And I said, "I don't know. What about Keller or Conway? How about Kilco?" And that's the way the name was generated. And that's the way it started. So he had 30% of the company. I had the rest. And we started doing this virtually. We kept our jobs because it wasn't big enough to sustain either one of us. And we kept our jobs and started this process externally.
So what year was that?
JP, I don't really remember exactly what year that was. It would have been the early to mid 90s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did it go? What did it, obviously people started calling you back immediately from the meeting with the board members, but you form the company, you hang out a shingle and say, "We're going to do this." Then what happened?
So we reached out to a CPA firm and told him what we're doing. And the guy loved it. He loved us, and he allowed us to use his secretary to answer the phone calls and all. So we had a virtual office, and when in the evenings after our stockbroker job was over, then we would go there and work the rest of the evening on whatever we had going on over there. We had one broker we sourced out of Ohio that was in this space, and she was a woman that she marketed directly to a lot of the gay communities, a lot of the people that had AIDS. So she was in that space, and and she was able to get the policies to us. Otherwise, we wouldn't know where to go. And she was the first broker we dealt with at that time to source policies to us. And then we would take them to this company, and they would fund them, and we would charge a commission, and that was the business model that continues today.
Yeah, still an industry, and life settlement is the official title, correct?
Well, life settlement is the industry I started and created. So there was a point in time when the AIDS market was met with some breakthroughs drug wise, and there was a thing called the AIDS cocktail, and it's supposed to be a cure back in the days. Everybody thought it was going to be a cure. It was not. It did have a large positive effects and extended lives beyond anything that was ever induced prior to that. But at the time, our business was there to service people that needed to sell their policy. So a lot of people stopped selling policies. A lot of investors stopped coming in to invest because they thought that this was the end of the market. And we had all these employees there to service, policies for folks. So I looked at other areas that could use the same services of what we were offering this one segment. And after about a year, uh, working with one of the largest actuary firms in the world, we developed what's called the life settlement industry, and that is the people 65 years and older, non-terminal, that could sell their policy now. Before me, there was no option. So you had either cancel a policy or just walk away from it, or you died and your families received the death proceeds. What I didn't know was when I created this product, it was going to be so large that it would disrupt the entire life insurance market. And at that time, I was 27 years old when I created this, and the insurance business model was totally different than mine. Their business model is such that they want somebody to take out a life insurance policy, pay on it for 10 or 15 years. They're going to increase that premium over time. The person's much older at this stage of the game, maybe on a fixed income, whatever, and can't afford the premium, and they let them lapse. So all the premiums they paid in, the insurance companies just get to keep. They don't have to pay out. So that I found out that 99% of the policies lapse. It's almost like 200 billion a year. So when we came along and created this industry and it was met with open arms throughout the whole entire country, it caused a major disruption to the mindset of the insurance industry, and they didn't like it.
Well, here you go again, just like your candy business. You're taking money out of somebody else's pocket by being successful and offering something that the market obviously wanted. How do you go from 27 years old solving a problem, that's really where so many great businesses come from is somebody identifies a problem and a need or desire in the market and fixes that problem. 27 years old to over your shoulder there, falling into the world of political corruption and corporate greed. Bridge the gap for me. What happened?
Well, the growth is what puts a target on your back, and being successful definitely does. It takes you into another space that most people don't even realize is there. And the growth of this industry took me to places I couldn't even imagine. And we were the first people to come out with a national commercial on mainstream TV. We did it in New York, Las Vegas, and California succinctly. And I remember we did it to start out with the terminally ill market, and that's the way it ran. And we finished up in New York, and then the commercial ran in Las Vegas. And during the Las Vegas run, I had completed the life settlement product. I'd spent $1 million on this ad, and I didn't have $1 million back then, JP. And we borrowed every dime we had to do this. And if we hadn't been successful, I probably would have not be talking to you today. So we, I called the commercial company up and I said, "Hey, look, we've got a new product coming out. I don't have another $1 million to spend with you guys. Can you just put a tagline on the bottom of the commercial we're running? It says, if you are 65 years or older and you want to sell your life insurance policies, call us." And they said, sure. So we did that. And right when that thing ran, it was right in the middle of Oprah. And Oprah was the first superstar of talk show in history. And it was almost like the Super Bowl. Every day she's on, everybody stopped what they're doing and they're going to watch Oprah. So this first ad on the 65 years and older ran right in the middle of Oprah, and I had 40 people hired in my company with a backup overflow system in Iowa, and this was met with such a response that it blew up the phone banks. It annihilated ours, and it blew up the overflow. And what was happening was it wasn't met with so much the people that wanted to sell a policy as it was to all these insurance agents who had a 20 or 30-year book of business that realized that they could sell these policies, get money, sell more or sell more instruments to these people and get more commissions. So they saw it as a huge business opportunity for them. And we were getting so many calls and signing up these agents. We ended up with 30,000 agents licensed with my company, and within 2 months, I had $9 billion hit the door in life insurance policies that people wanted to sell.
Wow. So that was actual so you were benefiting at both ends, from the commercial. You got the agents coming to you wanting to sell, and then that led to the people wanting to sell their policies. That's where those personal relationships was what ultimately converted into people coming in, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Very interesting. So, how does that connect to corporate greed and political corruption?
Well, so a couple of days after we had an influx of policies, my staff came to me and they said, Keller said, we've got a problem. I said, what's the problem? It looks like we're doing pretty good. And they said, no, it's a problem. Said, we've, the whole viatical is what was the AIDS market. That was what that was called, viatical. They said the viatical market only did $2 billion last year, the whole entire market. So we got 9 billion in. Said we can't nobody can buy this. There's not enough money in the industry to buy this. What are we going to do? And I said, there's only one thing to do: Wall Street. So we went to Wall Street the next 2 years. I met with 230 banks, signed 80 contracts, and raised $13 billion up there to buy policies on the marketplace and to absorb a 9 billion we had indoors. And so that was a double-edged sword. It also tipped our hand because a lot of people we dealt with were insurance companies and reinsurance firms, investment banks that had ties to insurance companies. So they're all intertwined. And another thing I did up there that probably was not good long term is growing up and studying to be an entrepreneur. I read a lot of books, and one of the books I read was on Bill Gates with Microsoft and IBM. And Bill won in that technology game because he signed non-competes with IBM. He locked them out of the software, so they thought the hardware was going to be more valuable than the software, and Bill showed them. But I thought, well, if it works for Bill, it'll work for me. So everybody I met with, I started sliding over non-competes, and I literally had locked out Wall Street from entering into this business. So when the business blew up and got substantially larger, everybody wanted in and they couldn't. So we were the only game in town at that time. So a lot of people, they were wanting in the business, and some people wanted us to get out of the business. So there was many motivations that came about at that point. But success will definitely put a target on your back. And so
That I
that,
agree with, and I
yeah,
understand. So it was a judgment call on your part, right? You locked people out, and they're sitting there looking over the fence, seeing all the grass growing, and they don't have a pair of clippers and don't can't even get in the yard. So it was I could see that. So what pay to play obviously resulted from you writing that book, Longhand Sitting in Prison. So far, everything that I've heard is on the up and up and is it's not only a great profitable business, but it sounds like it was an answer to a lot of people's prayers. They were looking for a solution, a way to get money out of their policies, or the agents looking for more product to sell. I mean, this seemed to solve several problems. How did you end up sitting in a prison?
good question. So, like I told you, the growth took me to places I never would imagine. And on a Monday, I was in the White House having lunch, trying to get a green card for one of my banker's fiance. So he would stop taking off on Fridays and meeting her in another country. We had a large competitor we were trying to buy at the time, and I needed this banker boots on the ground. And when I found out that while he was taking off on the weekends to meet this girl that lost her visiting visa, I was trying to get that recovered back and get him back in the saddle here to help me get this acquisition done. So I was having lunch in the White House on Monday, and Friday I'm back in New York, and I get a phone call 7 o'clock in the morning. It was a sobering phone call from my assistant that was telling me that my company was being raided by 100 armed FBI agents. Now, nothing had changed in 4 days from the guy that went to the White House on Monday till Thursday. I mean, till Friday, 4 days later.
So you were not there when it was raided. Well, your assistant obviously called you. What else what started coming out? How did you unpack it? How did you figure out what's going on?
But I didn't, JP, and that was the thing about it that was so frustrating because we wrote the laws for our state for this industry that didn't exist before. We hired a lobbyist and we had a senator to sponsor this bill, and we got it passed. So I had more questions than most people because we wrote the laws for our industry. We knew we didn't break them because we wrote them, and I couldn't figure out how this is possible or who's doing this or who's behind it. I had a million and one questions that were not even remotely close to being answered. And, that's the thing about it. We had our own jet at the time, which happened to be in the shop. I think there's a lot of things that were a godsend because it probably wasn't good for me to be back sooner. Nothing good would have come out of it. But so I had a delay and a really challenging time getting back. We had to find another plane, and it was an emergency situation. I only knew one criminal attorney who happened to be a good friend of mine. I called him and had him to leave a conference he was at in Houston, Texas, and fly back himself on a private plane back to Lexington. He made it back before I did. So when I got back to Lexington, I was met with my assistant. She shoved me in the floorboard in the back seat of the car so nobody would see me. Everybody was scared to death. They had the whole block taped off, crime scene tape. Every news channel knowing the man was there. It was well orchestrated media play, and they had tractor trailers, U-Hauls, looting out our whole company, 600 banker boxes from 7 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. That the officers were trying to destroy as much property as they could. They were issued keys to filing cabinets. They would throw the keys in the ground and drill out the brand new filing cabinets we had. They were brandishing weapons and even pulled guns on my employees at the time, threatening them with they didn't say certain things. They were not going to receive a paycheck or they were going to go to jail. So it was mass chaos back there. Because when I got back there and met with my assistant who ushered me in the floorboard of the car, and she did that because she was trying to hide me because the attorney firm was right across the street in a high rise right across from my building, Kilco. And so when I got up to the seventh floor where we met with the rest of the employees, they're all waiting for answers. I'm the CEO. I'm the guy that's always got the answers, right? I didn't have any, and I was as clueless as they were. And so here's these people that's been through this warfare and of abuse and looking for some kind of comfort. And I had nothing. I had nothing to give them. All I could do was say, "Look, I really don't know any more than you what's going on here, but we're going to get to the bottom of it, and we just got to stay together." And surprisingly, after all that, I didn't have one person that resigned.
Well, and you released your book about 3 weeks ago, and you actually met up with some of those folks at your launch party, didn't you?
Yes, we had about 20 people that showed up, and I had more than that reached out. They couldn't be there. There were other obligations they had or out of town or whatever. So yeah, it was substantial, and it was really heartfelt. It was humbling to know that these folks are still in the corner. And honestly, the book I wrote it two main purposes. One was for my kids so they would know the true story one day, and also for my employees so that they would know what happened one day. I can't imagine losing your job and going through this and not really knowing what happened. And sadly, there's a lot of people that have this happen to them that have the government weaponized and used against them that really don't know who orchestrated it. And usually there's somebody that does. I'd say 99% of the time it's the government's orchestrated in some fashion.
You, at one point during all of this, made a decision to have a little vacation. Talk about that.
So yeah, we went to trial, which I was looking forward to doing because we wrote the laws again in the state and we knew we didn't break an insurance law. So I was looking forward to going to trial and finally clearing this matter up. They'd sat on this for 2 years. And a year after this happened, I was summoned to DC and I was met with the majority leader's chief of staff. And he came in a room and grinning from ear to ear like he'd won the lottery. And he said, "So, Steve, have you learned your lesson yet?" And I said, "What lesson might that be?" And he said, "Up here, you got to pay to play." And that's the name of the book. So they were wanting me to hire the senator's son, who was started a lobbying firm. And again, there's no insurance laws federally, it's all state. So the majority leader tells me to do this, and thinking I'm going to do whatever he says to save my company and save these employees. So we started paying an exorbitant amount per month plus expenses. So, what we didn't know it was the insurance companies were paying more than we could afford behind my back to make sure my day did not go well, and it didn't. So after a lengthy trial, it came. We were not successful, and had three officers, including myself, were convicted. Two companies along with that, and after the trial, I was out pending appeal, no bond or anything like that. And going back to the middle of the trial, though, something happened that resonated and stayed with me. And when I was out pending appeal, still resonates with me. Was I had a crew of like 16 people that were on recess coming back to the courthouse after lunch, and we came up on a site in Lexington, Kentucky that should have been announced in a small town like that. And it was a motor brigade that was in front of my courthouse, and it was the attorney general. And the attorney general got out of his car, went into the courthouse, talked to my judge, got back in the motor brigade, and drove away. And after that, the demeanor of the judge was such that I didn't feel like I had any due process left in that courthouse after that. Anything we asked for was rejected. Everything the government asked for was given, and it was truly tilted at one sided at that point. That event stuck with me for what I'm about to tell you, because I got a call when I was out pending an appeal from one of my main attorneys who sounded like he'd been on a 3-day drunk, and he could barely talk. And he said, "Steve," he goes, "my worst nightmare is now a reality. They want to lock you up." And I said, "Why? How's this possible? We're on appeal." And he goes, "I don't really know, but it's bad." And he hung the phone up. And you can imagine how you felt at that point. I was facing a 14-year sentence. I had two small kids, had a wife. We had moved up to South Michigan at that point, where her family was. Because my thought process was, we're going to lose everything we have here, and the government took all they could. And I wanted her to have support if I did have to go to prison with her family. So I had a guy that came to me with an idea and planted this idea in my mind to leave the country as a possibility. And the city had a contact that could help me disappear. And when he first told me that, I blew it off and I said, "I don't even want to talk about it. I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to think that way. I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous." And after the phone call I got, it was no longer ridiculous. And I went to my ex-wife now and I said, "We've got an option. We've got an option that is not really a good option, but there's not a good one for us to think about anyway across the board, you know." And I told her about it, and she said, "Well, that's it's a pretty big decision. We need to talk to the family about it." So I had both families come in one night. We all met. We talked about options, and all of them agreed that they felt the same way I did, that there was no due process for us. Nothing we tried was successful, and we knew we were just getting steamrolled. We didn't really know by who, but it was a very sad evening. We felt like it was a massive funeral because we're saying goodbye to our families, and we chose to leave the country.
So how'd that work out?
Well, we packed all we could. I rented a private jet. I knew that that side of the equation was not met with TSA, was not met with checks and balances like you normally find with the commercial airlines. You didn't have to go through lines and wave a wand or anything like that. You just show up and go. So we did that. We packed as much stuff as we could, mostly the kids' toys and all. And we had $300,000 in cash I had managed to save somehow, and we stuffed that in diapers and kids' toys and whatnot, and off we went. And we landed in Cancun, Mexico to start out with. And when you go there, you have to declare, a certain amount of money or not. And I declared nothing. And so they have this antiquated red light. This thing's huge. It looks like it's something out of the 1950s, and it has a button on it you push, and the thing starts flickering back and forth like a roulette wheel. And if it lands on red, your backs get checked. If it lands on green, you just go right through, no check. And so the woman introduced this light to me, and she told me what the deal was. She said, "Now you have to press the button." I was like, "Okay," because I declared nothing, and coming in. So I've got my hand like this, just trying to push. I'm trying to gravitate my finger into that button, and I am scared to absolute death. This is like playing Russian roulette as far as I'm concerned. So I hit the button, and this thing starts blinking back and forth, and it starts slowing down. It's going slower and slower, and it finally clicks on red. And my the perspiration is like a water hose now. I mean, I've got water coming off my face. It's going nuts. The whole staff in there was all females, and my 2 kids were completely white-headed, white hair. They call them tow-headed. And one thing about the Latino community is they're very family oriented and they love kids. And they were so taken with these 2 kids that looked so different from their population there because everybody had dark hair. And they were enamored with these 2 kids, and luckily, my kids were wide open, especially my daughter, she was running everywhere, and they were having trouble containing the kids. In the meanwhile, I looked at my ex-wife, and she looked at me, and we just shook our heads, and we started grabbing these bags and throwing them through the conveyor belt, one right after another, and the ladies that were taking care of the kids kinda looked at me and, kinda like, "What are you doing?" But, they turned away and started looking at the kids, and they just allowed us to do this. So, we literally dragged those bags through that conveyor belt ourselves and, got through the other side and zipped them up and got the heck out of there as quick as we could.
And y'all lived happily ever after?
For just a few weeks, I went from there, I went to Panama, and I, ended up working for an attorney firm there. I was the business guru for the attorney firm. I would ferret out deals that were brought to him that were either fraudulent or not, or I was in charge of constructing the deals and putting them together for investors he had, and it was going pretty good. He took care of us. He made us basically disappear, put things in corporations, and we became best friends with him and his wife. They had 2 kids our kids' age, so it worked out just perfect. And so I was phone called one day. I got this phone call from my ex-wife who was deathly ill at that time, figuratively. She had the flu or something, and she said she was feeling deathly ill anyway. We went back to the house, and I met her there, and she looked like she just got out of a hospital bed, and she was urging me to take my son, who's 5 years old at the time, to a karate class at an international school we had him enrolled in, and I purposely didn't wanna drive at all then. I didn't want a small traffic infraction to bring down the house and, have the question like, "Who are you?" So I refused to drive, but on this one occasion, I gave in and I decided to do that. And I drove my son to the karate class and he went to class. And afterwards, we got back in the car, was heading back home. And soon I was motioned to pull over by a police officer on a motorcycle with an AK-47 strapped to his back, which is pretty typical in Panama or was back then, not for Americans. So I played stupid and said I didn't know any Spanish at all, which I knew very little, but I knew a few words. And he motioned for me to go over in this vacant parking lot that looked like it had been a parking lot for maybe a Walmart. No building there. The building had been torn down. So I pulled in there with my 5-year-old in the back seat, and these cars started coming out of nowhere, screeching to a halt, and formed a half moon around my vehicle. And as they would screech to a halt, they would throw open their doors and they would brandish guns over top of the door. And I must have had 30 guns pulled on us at that point.
So they had caught up with you, or why were they pulling you over?
So yeah, they had staked me out, and they Interpol or any acronyms behind their names, I think, were there. And so yeah, my 5-year-old son and I, we sit in the car, and of course he's asking, Daddy, what's going on? And I was like, it's not good, son. Your mom will explain all this to you later. Just stay with me. If anybody asks you to leave, just tell them you're good where you are. Do not leave my side. Strength in numbers, and right then we needed to be together. So I was worried about him out of my sight, and worried what they would do with me without him by my side. So I had a lot of thoughts going through my head at that time, but fear was not one of them at that time. I think I became fatherly strong for him. It's like a paternal strength I had because I had him with me. I had to be strong. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done. But this was an overwhelming sight. And eventually, the embassy came, and they said, "We think you know why we're both here. We need to go." And so I rode with my 5-year-old son on my lap, with me in handcuffs, to a third world jail in Panama, and eventually got to call my ex-wife from there and told her that something terrible had happened, that they'd caught us, and to come on down, and she needed to get my son.
Did you ever hear how they tracked you down?
No, the best I can think about was my parents would go to payphones and call me. There, I was buying burner phones. I would pay somebody $25 off the street to go, kids to run in and buy a new phone for me. I had a backup. So when they would call me from payphones, I would give them the next number to call, and I would throw away the other phone that I just recently talked on. Well, that did okay there, but the FBI was staking out my whole entire family. They had bought a condo adjacent to where my parents had a condo in Lexington, Kentucky. I don't know if they bought it or just took it over or what, but they camped out there and they watched every move they made. They had cars surveilling them, and I'm sure that they watched them go to a payphone, and they probably triangulated that phone to the location or country I was.
I see.
Yeah. We were doing this on the fly. I kinda joke about it, and I say, I was pretty good CEO, but I was a horrible criminal. So, there wasn't any forethought. We were just on the fly, on the run, and honestly just thought, I guess, that they'd call it a day if I wasn't coming back in the country, and that wasn't the case at all.
So you came back, you had already lost lost at the original trial, you were awaiting an appeal. They I would assume now you're a flight risk, so they bring you back, they put you in detention? How did things progress? Did you do the whole Con Air thing? What happened to you?
Yeah. So, oddly enough, when I was in that third world jail, which it was the worst conditions I've ever experienced in my entire life, and luckily I wasn't in the worst part of it. I went to the bathroom down there and saw it, and this place had dirt floors and bars. It looked like something off Gunsmoke. It was just unbelievable, and the conditions that they had versus the facilities here in America. But they were kind enough to leave me in this holding facility that had a tile floor. It looked like a room where they had stored furniture in. They had desks and chairs around. It wasn't like a normal, jail cell or anything. That's where I stayed that one night, the first night. And the next morning, my ex-wife showed up with two attorneys in the front of the jail, and I was met with six guys that came in the back, nondescriptive. They were all dressed in black and armored up, had guns, pistols, rifles, and they said, "Let's go." So they ushered me out of the back of the jail into a SUV, and off we go, riding for about 20 minutes without any words being spoken. And finally, I started just frantically bugging him, asking where we're going because I'm thinking they're going to take me out to execute me. I didn't know. It was the most terrified in the whole situation that I was. And after several moments of bugging him kept asking him repeatedly, please tell me where we're going. One of them looked back and said airport. So in about 10 minutes, I did see airport signs, and it lowered my anxiety from 1,000 back to 100. And so then I was taken to the airport and flown back to Miami after that. And that did start the Con Air trip. I was there for a week or two, and then I was flown to Atlanta. I was there for 2 days. And then from there, I went to Oklahoma. And Oklahoma it was like a transient terminal airport for prisoners.
Yeah, it's a hub.
Yeah. So, and the way that works is, you got all these flights that land there. It must happen the same time, I guess. It did for us anyway. There was 4 or 5 other jets there on the tarmac, and it was the strangest scene. All of these prisoners were standing in front of these jets that they had been deplaned from, handcuffed, and had shackles on everybody's legs, and they were all different colored jumpsuits there. I remember it looked like just these armies of people, and they were either trading planes or getting ready to be transported to another plane somewhere else or getting on a bus to go somewhere. And oddly enough, there's marshals everywhere down there with rifles. It was a really, really surreal scene, intimidating scene. I stepped off the stairs from the jet, and as soon as my foot hit the pavement, one of my leg irons came off, and it dinged on the pavement real loud. And so it was just a faulty chain, I guess. There's nothing I did, but when I did that, I had every marshal that was standing around now had those rifles pointed at me, and it was crazy, and they were like, "Freeze!" Like where am I going to go? And it was a big deal, and it was terrifying. And so they came over to fix the leg iron, and off I went. But that was that was my first blush of an intimidating moment.
Well, what do you think if somebody, hopefully people get the book, it reads like a John Grisham novel, pay to play, what do you think people would be most surprised by if they buy the book and read it?
Well, the book's going to show how the pay to play system works. It's going to show the intersection of companies that cross paths with DC, the politicians and all. So in the book, you're going to see me with the majority leader of Senate a lot. You're going to see him at my office, and you're gonna see how this system works from the inside out. And like I say, most people can't connect the dots. They don't know who's really behind the government interactions against them or the companies or the industries. This one's going to show it all.
Wow. So you wrote the book while you were in prison. How long were you incarcerated?
I was locked up for 8.5 years in Lexington, Kentucky, at one facility behind a razor wire fence because I was a flight risk. I couldn't go to camp, so I spent my whole time there, which was a bittersweet. My parents were there, so I did get to see them as often as they would allow, which wasn't that often, but better than nothing. And so I did enjoy that, but yeah, it was a long time. So how I utilized my time was I studied a lot. I wrote. I learned how to write in that prison. I wrote 7,000 pages by pen and ink. I read books on how to write. I read books by Stephen King and John Grisham and other writers on how to do this. And so the book is an evolution of about 15 years of work. It's not something that I said, I think I'm going to write a book about this. And 30 days later, I have a book. It's not the way it worked. And I had a lot of really good breaks. I had some literary geniuses, I think, on the editing side and collaboration side that has also helped form this book up to where it is. So it's definitely not going to be a book of a first time author. And it's being received as such now. So I think we have like 65-star reviews now on Amazon alone. So it's being received well. I wrote it as a as a political thriller, a novel, you will. So it's really a book that's going to stand out in the space it's in as far as true crimes.
So I was introduced to you a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks before your book launch. So maybe month ago, a month and a half ago, something like that. And I was introduced to you by some folks from the White Collar Support Group, but you and they, this small group of inner circle of people, were putting together something called Justice Restoration Foundation. And your pay to play book was intermingled and interwound with them and what they were doing and aligned with some of the things that you and they were hoping to impact and affect or change. Talk to me a little bit about Justice Restoration Foundation, what work you're trying to do there, and what you see as the future and the potential impact that y'all can have.
Okay, so I really attribute the book for igniting that movement. And what happened was I was excited to finally put this book out, apprehensive and excited both to do this. I waited years to come out with this for a couple reasons. One, I was fearful for my life and my kids' life, and secondly is I didn't think people was prepared for the truth years ago, and I think now they've seen so much outlandish things happen within the Department of Justice and just the political arena, what's happened, that now they get it. And they are able to accept the truth, and they're getting behind pay to play. And they're using this as a benchmark for definition of the pay to play system in DC and how government or how large companies are controlling a lot of other industries. And, I was excited to come out with this book, and I got introduced to the White Collar Support Group, which is an online meeting every week. They didn't have this when I was around. I wish they had of. And I thought it was this is a great group. It's a very large group. And I got on there and I started hearing the same stories, the same blueprints that happened to me years ago. And I thought, this is incredible. This is still allowed to go on. It's more profusely happening now than it was even back then. And I was like, all these white collar guys and with AAA personalities and nobody's done anything. We all want stuff done yesterday. And I couldn't imagine this. And then it's like a punch in the gut. And this resonant feeling came over me that, Steve, this is not about you or your book. It's about what you can use this story for to help others. And so I met more white collar guys, and I talked about creating a movement to stop pay to play out here and how we're going to do it. And one thing led to another, and I started meeting more guys, and we just kind of evolved this Justice Restoration Foundation together and creating a 501(c)(3). And what I think is just absolutely a godsend is this formation is bringing us some of the best talent in the country together that don't necessarily would much rather be running companies, but they see the need to make a difference out here. And they see a need that all of this guys coming together can have an impact on this system to kind of peel this thing back and try to save our country again, because there's like a 98% conviction rate now. I mean, casinos don't even have a 98% win rate. If you got a 98% in anything, there's something corrupt going on. The system is broken. And you can hear a lot of stories. I mean, I could tell you 1,000 stories that I've met with people, but the stories is not itself the problem. Those are the symptoms of a systematic problem that we have to look at. So we formed this corporation to come up with some ideas and what we can do with a team that have been there in diverse backgrounds and diverse professional backgrounds to come together and to create change in this country and try to get that 98% needle at least back down to 50 where it's fair. All we're asking for is fairness in this country. And we have got to stop going after our entrepreneurs, our innovators, our professional people, our doctors. I mean, this is the thread of the backbone of this country. It's the fiber of the country that's built capitalism to number one in the world. And we're not going to be number one in the world long if we keep attacking this fiber. And right now, our 501c is doing a massive financial study to show the public how much this costs the general population every year by the government attacking companies that don't have a victim. They're just going after us by either a competitor or a political adversary or greedy whistleblower, and they're harming thousands of employees. They're harming the bottom line of these companies. They're putting people that are innovators in prison. I mean, what if they had put Elon Musk or Steve Jobs in prison and we wouldn't have SpaceX? We wouldn't have all the innovations that Elon's brought to us that we're able to utilize now, electric cars. We wouldn't have the cell phone that we have now. Just a lot of technology. And how much technology are we missing right now from even chemists or something that would have a medical breakthrough that's sitting in prison right now because of this attack on our society. But that number is astronomical, JP. We estimate it now to be about 1.6 trillion a year in losses that the government is creating by attacking victimless crimes.
Is other than bringing awareness and education and shining a spotlight on these things, is that all you can do? Do you all see hope? Does the organization see hope? And full disclosure, I fully support what you guys are doing and have leaned in with my background experience in media and communications to help get this thing off the ground. What do you think there is to do about it?
Well, so far we've identified laws are on the books that are 20 or 30 years old that are outdated. The language is outdated. It needs to be up to date to 2026. And there's some language we could put it back in these bills that cause it to have teeth and accountability back to the DOJ because they have none right now. There's numerous problems here that we see across the board that need to be addressed, and you can't do them all. So we're trying to pick the ones that we can affect immediately. There's some longer term goals, changes we'd like to see. I think one of the things that we've done as a system, sometimes the system creates the problem, or if you don't have a large enough system, you have people dealing in the gray area and no guidance, and that presents a problem too. So there has to be a balance. And one thing we see as imbalanced is government overreach, and we believe that this is done because the system is out of balance with prosecutors, and prosecutors have total immunity. There's no accountability there. There should have been some forethought about putting some accountability in along with the immunity, so they're not encouraged to lie, or they're not encouraged to win at all costs, which is happening now. And there's been a lot of changes right now. I mean, in 2026, we have a tremendous amount of transparency now we never had before, and certainly didn't have it back in my day with all the social media, with AI. There's good and bad with AI, but we can certainly use AI to ferret out what's fraud or what's not, or what's a non-truth. And we can show transparency within what's happened with the court systems, what's happened with Congress. And, that's being done now. And it's being done a lot by the younger population that's gravitated to this technology, and they're using it to their benefit, and they're starting to ask a lot of questions. Why are things done this way? One of the things, another avenue, whether you're a gun fan or not, but the bottom line is, I don't think any American should be without their constitutional rights. And a long time ago, a law was created that if you were convicted of a crime, that you lost your Second Amendment rights, your gun rights, which I'm without now, and in my case has nothing to do with guns. This was a white collar situation with insurance. Martha Stewart, same deal. I mean, what's Martha have to do with guns? But she lost her rights as well. So the mechanism to get your rights back has been on the books for 30 years, but the government hasn't funded the department, staffed anybody there to process the paperwork. And their argument early on was it would cost too much money or take too much manpower to do that because we have such a huge backlog now. But you fast forward to where we are now. We're 2026. We have AI. AI can rapid fire through that paperwork like shuffling cards, and it could find the nexus to the crimes that wouldn't be allowed for their Second Amendment. If you have any type of violent crime with a gun, I think a drug charge or any kind of sexual mishap or charges there, then you're not eligible for the gun rights, and I totally agree with that. But there's a whole lot of people out there in my shoes that would like to have their gun rights back, and I think that's happening. There's a movement for that. It started in 2025. We're going to get behind there. We want to have as many voices on a petition as possible through our foundation, and we were help market this. We're going to help lobby it to get that thing passed. Just things within our reach right now that we can entertain getting some of these rights back for people and putting things back the way it should have been years ago.
That's excellent. So for you, where would someone want, other than going to Amazon and looking at pay to play, where would they find more information about you?
So I have a really excellent website. It's Stephen, Stephen dash Keller, KELLER.com. You can pull up there and find more information on me. You can order the book through there. Most people are gravitated to Amazon. They move 70% of the books in the marketplace, and they're quick. So you can certainly go to Amazon and buy pay to play as well. Barnes and Noble is carrying it. Anywhere you can buy books, you can buy pay to play. But my go-to is either my website or Amazon.
And the foundation?
The foundation also has an extensive website, a lot of stuff going on there. You could find out through the website what you would like to get involved in. We need support. We're looking right now to garner as much support on the different areas as somebody's willing to help us with. And you could go to the justicerestorationfoundation.com and pull that website up and find out everything we're doing there.
Excellent. Stephen Keller, good to have you on. Maybe we do another interview at some point unpacking the years, nearly a decade that you spent behind the fence, and talk a little bit more about that for people that are facing it and presently going through it, or family members, loved ones going through it, or about to go through it. I'd love to dive into that more down the road in a follow-up interview. But this is JP Maroney with Justice Impact Show. Stephen Keller, pay to play, get the book. Like I said, it reads like a John Grisham novel, and you won't be disappointed. We'll see you again in the next episode. Take care.
Thanks, JP.